After the downfall of the kings of House Hoare, it would be centuries before the Iron Islands recovered. A long, slow climb back up to prosperity and power. Of the kings who reigned during this bleak and terrible age, we need not mention. Many were puppets of lords and priests. A few were more like the reavers of the Age of Heroes, men such as Harwyn Hoare and his son Ravos the Reaper, who savaged the north in the years of the Hungry Wolf's bloody reign, but they were rare and far between. Both reaving and trade played a part in the restoration of the pride and prowess of the islands. Other kingdoms now built larger and more formidable warships than the Iron Men, but nowhere were sailors any more daring. Merchants and traders sailing from Lannisport and the harbours of Great Wick, Harlaw and Orkmont spread out across the seas, calling at Lannisport, Old Town and the Free Cities, and returning with treasures their forebears had never dreamed of. Reaving continued as well, but the wolves of the sea of old no longer hunted close to home. The Greenland kings had grown too powerful to provoke. Instead, they found their prey in more distant seas, in the Basilisk Isles and the Stepstones, and along the shores of the disputed lands. Some took service as sailors, fighting for one or another of the free cities in their endless trade wars. One such was Harwyn Hoare, third-born son of King Harwyn the Cunning, a shrewd and advantageous king. Harwyn had spent his entire reign accumulating wealth and avoiding war. War is bad for trade, he said infamously, even as he was doubling, then tripling the size of his fleets and commanding his smiths to forge more armour, swords and axes. Weakness invites attack, Harwyn declared. To have peace we must be strong. His son Harwyn had no use for peace, but much and more for arms and armour that his father had forged. A belligerent boy, by all accounts, and third in the line of succession, Harwyn Hoare was sent to sea at an early age. He sailed with a succession of reavers in the Stepstones, visited Volantis, Tyrosh and Bravos, and became a man in the pleasure gardens of Lys. Spent 2 years in the Basilisk Isles as a captive of a pirate king, sold his sword to a free company in the disputed lands, and fought in several battles as a second son. When Harwyn returned to the Iron Islands, he found his father, Harwyn, dying, and his eldest brother 2 years dead from grayscale. A second brother stood between Harwyn and the crown, and his sudden death, even as the king was breathing his last breath, remains a matter of dispute to this day. Those present at Prince Harlan's passing declared his death an accident, the result of a fall from a horse. But of course, it would have been worth their lives to suggest otherwise. Beyond the Iron Islands, it was widely assumed that Prince Harwyn was behind his brother's demise. Some claimed he had done the deed himself, others that Prince Harwyn had been slain by a faceless man of Bravos. King Harwyn expired 6 days after the crown prince, leaving his third-born son to inherit the throne. As Harwyn Hardhand, he would soon write his name in blood across the histories of the Seven Kingdoms. When the new king visited his father's shipyards, he declared that longships are meant to be sailed. When he inspected the royal armories, he announced that the swords are meant to be bloodied. King Harwyn had often said that weakness invites attack. When his son gazed across Iron Man's Bay, he saw only weakness and confusion in the Riverlands, where the lords of the Tridents chafed relentlessly beneath the heel of the Storm King, Targaryen, in the far-off distant stormlands. Harwyn assembled a host and led it across the bay on 100 of his father's longships, landing unchallenged north of Seaguard. They carried their ships overland to the Blue Fork of the Trident, and then swept downstream with fire and sword. A few of the river lords took up arms against them, but most did not, for they had little love and less loyalty to the liege lord in the stormlands. In those days, the ironborn were thought to be savage fighters at sea, but easily put to rout on land. But Harwyn Hoare was not like other ironborn. Tempered in the disputed lands, he proved to be as fierce afoot as he was at sea, routing every foe. After he dealt the Blackwoods a crushing defeat, many lords of the Trident declared for him. At Fairmarket, Harwyn found himself facing Targaryen, the young Storm King, leading a host half again the size of his own. But the Stormlanders were ill-led, weary, and far from home, and the Ironmen and River Lords shattered them. King Arak lost 2 brothers and half his men, and was lucky to escape with his own life. As he fled south, the small folk of the Riverlands rose up, and his garrisons were driven out or slaughtered. The broad, fertile Riverlands and their wealth passed from the hands of the Storm Kings to those of the Ironborn. In one bold stroke, Harwyn Hardhand had increased his holdings tenfold and made the Iron Islands once more a power to be feared. Those lords of the Trident who had joined him in hopes of freeing themselves from the Durandons soon learned that a new master was far more brutal and demanding than their old one. Harwyn would rule his conquest with a heavy hand until his death, spending far more time in the Riverlands than on the Iron Islands, riding from one end of the Trident to the other at the head of a rapturous army, sniffing out any hint of rebellion, whilst collecting taxes, tributes, and salt wives. His place was a tent, his throne a saddle, men said of him. His son Halleck, who succeeded to the crown when the Hard Hand died in his 64th year, was a man of the same ilk. Halleck visited the Iron Islands only 3 times during his reign, spending less than 2 years there all told. Though he called himself Ironborn, sacrificed to the drowned gods, and always kept 3 priests at his side, there was more of the trident than of the salt sea in House Hoare, and he seemed to look upon the islands only as a source of arms, ships, and men. His own reign was even more bloodier than his father's, if less successful, marked by unsuccessful wars against the Westermen and Stormlanders, and no less than 3 failed attempts to conquer the Vale, all ending in disaster at the Bloody Gate. Like his sire, King Halleck spent a great deal of his reign in camp tents on campaign. When not at war, he ruled his broad domain from a modest tower house at Fairmarket in the heart of the Riverlands, near the site of his father's greatest victory. His own son, when he became king, desired a grander seat than that, and would spend most of his own reign building it. But the tale of Harwyn the Black and the building of Harwyn Hall is one for another time.